Jason, hello, sir. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Oh, no problem. You guys can still make fun of Zoe. There's nothing wrong with still making fun of him, although he did a good job.
No, there's plenty of things to make fun of him about. He's a mess.
Well, how much did he eat during the game? Because when he's doing the radio broadcast, it's just a constant stream of food. He's going out into that hallway behind the booth just to get whatever has been, put out there or what's been out there for hours. It doesn't matter. Every break, he's going to get more food.
You know what? He wasn't bad. And I think it has to be with we never knew when that little camera was going to come up in the corner and show us three sitting there in the booth. And the worst thing that can happen is you have dressing or crumbs just sitting there on your mouth as you come up on cam. So I'm sure he had a lot of fear in his heart if he tried to stuff his mouth too much during the game.
It's the one thing he takes seriously is like he takes that job, and Hardy will attest to this. He takes the play-by-play job or the color commentary job far more serious than he takes the midday show, wouldn't you say?
Yeah. I think that's a pretty low bar to set. But going into that game, and I want to get all your thoughts on the players in the game and everything, Jason. But going into that game last night, it was an unorthodox setup without a traditional play-by-play guy and essentially two analysts or three analysts together. Did you have any dry runs, any rehearsals? Because I'll say what Fred already said. I was really impressed with how well it flowed and how well the three of you worked together and managed to mix in good information about what had happened on the field. But it was info and analysis all together. It didn't seem like it was your first time doing something like that.
Yeah, no dry run or no rehearsals. We talked a lot about kind of what we were striving to do. And listen, the New England Patriots last year, Devin and myself did an alternate cast, and my guy Bob Sosi and Zoe were on the call. And this year they wanted to mix it up, and they had a vision of what it would look like. And the preseason's different. There's a lot of different guys playing. And to have three guys in the booth that played the game that can talk intelligently about what's going on the field, but also talk about what's going on within the organization. You guys know Zoe's there every day. Devin and myself have been up to training camp. We got a chance to talk to a few players, Gerard Maye before the game. I think that's a lot of the information that fans want to know. All right, there's 5 offensive linemen that they have to figure out by game one, but what are those combinations looking like? What are the receivers? Who's going to be the guys that are going to be lining up out there? How are the two rookies doing? We saw Joe Milton, Drake Maye a little bit last night. So I think those are the things that fans want to know, and I think it's a cool experience to try that during the preseason and see what it looks like.
What did you think about Drake Maye yesterday getting such limited reps? What was your feeling on that?
I didn't anticipate that. I honestly thought that he would play a little bit longer and we'd get to see more of him. From watching it, I think a big part of that was, listen, you got Jacoby Brissett, who's going to be your starter, I would assume, and you have Drake Maye. Those guys are competing. You're trying to bring Maye along. And the one thing you don't want to do is put him out there without the starting offensive line out there to protect him. And I think that probably had to be a factor for Gerard Mayo and Alex Van Pelt. David Andrews is a guy who's played a lot of football, and he's your center. And I'm not sure that they know exactly who's going to be the backup to Dave. You don't want to play Dave too much in these preseason games. You don't want to play Michael Winu too much in these preseason games. City Soul wasn't out there. So I think it was a combination of you want to get Drake Maye some work. I think it was also like, well, we don't want to put Drake Maye out there in front of a backup offensive line because we want to make sure we're keeping them clean and we're keeping them healthy. So I think there was somewhat of a combination probably for the coaching staff of trying to figure out exactly how much he was going to play. And judging off that game last night, I would assume to see a lot of Drake Maye next week when they go against the Philadelphia Eagles.
Oh, you do? Okay. And is that because of the joint practices? We talked to Burt Breer earlier, and he was saying that his footwork under center was all messed up when they got him, and that they've been working on that. And so do you think the joint practices and then going into that game, that will be why do you think he'll play more in the next game?
Because he didn't play much in his first game. And I think
gotta do it at some point, right?
Exactly. And I think the joint practices are huge. Listen, the time I spent in New England, the one thing we knew, joint practices can be hectic and it can be chaotic. I was at the Giants and Panthers joint practice, and there was a fight every 10 seconds. But the one thing you knew as a player, if you went into the joint practices and you played a ton of snaps during the course of that week, you probably weren't going to play much in the game. I think different for a young guy and Drake Maye as a rookie, you're working on that footwork every single day in practice, and you want to see him improve on it. But no matter what you do in practice as a quarterback, you can't be hit. So I'm working on my footwork, and you can just think about that the whole time. You don't have to think about, all right, my footwork's not right. If I don't hit the open guy, like somebody's going to smack me in the mouth. So you have to get him out there in live action. I think the fact that he didn't play much in this game, I think they're going to play him a lot in the next game. And it'll be a conversation of, all right, if you're going to play Drake Maye a lot, do you play Jacoby a lot? Jacoby's a guy that's played a lot of football. So I think that's probably the conversation that Mayo's having with his staff as they lead up into that game of maybe getting Jacoby a ton of reps throughout the course of the week. I don't know how they're going to work it out, but I think you have to play Drake Maye in the game at some point in this preseason where you can see a lot of reps so that you can coach him off of it.
All right, you mentioned these joint practices and the fights, and that's been happening again this year with these joint practices. How legit are those fights, Jason McCourty? Like, is there like a real intent to hurt someone in those fights, or are they more skirmishes? What's your read on those?
I mean, I can't imagine. Like I watched Kirby Joseph and Malik Neighbors go at it, and I mean they're throwing blows to the helmet. So when you talk about intent to hurt somebody, you're only going to hurt yourself if you're punching the helmet. I guess God bless the Guardian caps that are on top of that are protecting the hands and the head all together. But I think it's a little bit more frustration throughout training camp where now here it is, you're in day 10, 11, it's getting to those tough days, although training camp nowadays is a lot easier. I feel like an old guy when you say that and you're talking about, well, back in my day, it used to be this. But you just get tired of going against the same opponent. Now you bring in fresh blood. And for a lot of teams, you're working off of whatever happened last year. So if you're a part of a secondary and people say you struggled last year, now you get a chance to go against another opponent. It's like, all right, it's our chance to show everybody like we're a different team this year, a different unit. So I don't think it's intent to hurt. It's just intent to poke your chest out and show that, you know what, we're going to be for real this year, no matter what the position group. You mentioned, we talked about Giants and Panthers. The Giants offensive line is trying to be much improved. You're getting a chance to go up against a guy like Aiden Hutchinson, McNeil on the inside. So when you go against those guys, you want to prove that, you know what, we are an improved unit and we're somebody that's going to be a factor for this team this season.
Just real quick, Malik Neighbors, I heard a Giants guy who's been at all the camp. Malik Neighbors is crazy. He's awesome. Like if he drops the ball, like he immediately just starts pounding the quarterback. Like he's talking about puffing out your chest. Malik Neighbors is legit. All right, go ahead.
All right. You mentioned the quarterbacks in these joint practices being able to like work on things without having to worry about getting hit. But for the other players like yourself, would you rather go out in a joint practice situation or in a preseason game situation? Like, which do you think they get more out of ultimately?
I think the joint practices, in the sense of when you go out there in the preseason game, that film is going to be sent around to every single team in the league, and you're starting to watch it and you're developing your game plans for whenever you go against somebody in the regular season. So, you always say when you're watching a preseason game, well, it's going to be more vanilla. The defensive coordinator is not really going to bring any pressure. They're not going to do certain things. The offensive coordinator is not game planning it. He's not dialing anything up. Well, it's the exact opposite when you get out there in the joint practice, especially if it's a team that you're not going to be playing against that season. You're dialing up and you're trying to do everything possible. So one thing we talked about a lot last night was third down situations for both sides of the ball. That's where you really see who the coordinators are and what they're really good at. And you get in those joint practices, you look at an offensive line for the New England Patriots right now where you feel pretty good about the three interior guys. But on the outside, you have Okafor, you have Lowe, you have Calvin Anderson. You're trying to figure out who are going to be your starting tackles. You get in there in those joint practices and a team like the Philadelphia Eagles and what they have up front, you get a chance to really see those guys up against some of the premier pass rushers in this game. So to me, you get so much more out of it because Vic Fangio, the defensive coordinator for the Eagles, he's going to be dialing up in practice because he's still trying to figure out who can do what on their roster as well. So I think that's where the challenge comes for especially a young team like the Patriots, the receivers on the outside, being able to look out there at the Philadelphia Eagles defense and decipher, are they in man or in a zone? How does that change my route? Hey, are they blitzing? Am I the hot guy? All of those situations come up, especially for the young guys, Drake Maye and Joe Milton, making sure they're in the right play. We talked to Milton before the game, and he talked about just simple getting a play call from the offensive coordinator and then saying it to the rest of the team in the huddle was going to be has been his biggest challenge of being in the NFL. So those are the things that you want to see and that you're going to get a chance to see in the joint practices.
Jason, you talked a little bit about it last night during the game, but was there anything from like a cornerback perspective, watching the quarterbacks last night, specifically Brissett and Maye and even Joe Milton, anything from those guys from your perspective as a defensive player that particularly impressed you or concerns you going forward?
So not a ton of action from Maye and Brissett, so it's so hard to really get a feel for those guys, especially with some of the penalties that they have where you're in situations where it's second and long, third and long. They weren't able to run the ball, especially early on in the game. And when you talk about a DB, when you're sitting there and I know you can't run the ball and we're in these situations, it allows me to kind of sit back and read and make plays. Joe Milton played the most. I would say the touchdown strike that he had was really impressive. Not the throw. When you have a guy that open, you just get the ball to him and let him catch it. But Hoyer did a really good job during the game of showing Joe Milton moving the free safety with his eyes and his shoulder with a pump opposite and then coming back and making that throw to Jackson. Those are the things you want to see. I will say for Drake Maye, the one thing you wanted to see was him get out there. And I mentioned it with Milton, but the same thing with him. Run a clean operation, get in and out of the huddle. Those are the things that you're going to want to see early on. But as far as those guys making throws and doing things, we didn't see them enough to sit there and say, hey, as a DB, like he's staring down his receiver or he's doing a really good job looking people off. Right. I think Van Pelt with the play action is going to be a lot of fun to watch as they're able to get this zone run game going up front and what they're able to build off of that.
All right. Listen, great job, Jason McCourty. Congratulations on all the success with the broadcasting. You're doing it. You're very talented at it, and enjoy you doing these games. And you were with Zoe, who we've seen his balls, and so we all have that going for us. All right.
I didn't know that's where that was going. I didn't anticipate that at all.
I didn't know what other superlatives I could give out.
The conversation was so nice and so professional up until that point, and Fred just had to,
I had to ruin it.
Yeah,
that's my thing.
Well, I'll make sure we don't see those of Zoes while we're up there in the booth. We like Zoe, we love Zoe, we don't want to be that close.
All right, very good. Well, I would suggest that. All right, thank you, Jason. We appreciate it very much.
If you like that clip, and how could you not? Check out more videos from Toucher and Hardy here. Point slightly up and to the left. For more Patriots analysis and opinion, hit this playlist. Point slightly down and to the left. And for the latest from the Sports Hub, download at 985thesportshub.com.